We are affiliated with Brigham Young University and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. However, these classes are intended for a general audience, and please keep that in mind when you're asking questions and addressing those to the panelists or to Elder Tanner. We would like to thank him for his time and expertise in helping with these classes, and it is a great sacrifice of time and greatly appreciated by all of us. And we'll now turn the time over to Elder Tanner for his presentation.
And I will be on here and go to Ancestry. Okay, we're going to talk about today, this is going to be a research example or a research process. What has happened previously is that one of the missionaries who has basically now been released from their mission gave me the name of an ancestor to research. And then we sat down together for a very short time, like about an hour, and she gave me a background of what they had done and the questions that they had. Okay, this on the left-hand side of the screen is a family search open to that individual. And the person is called Greenberry Terman, T-E-R-M-A-N. And he was supposedly, according to this, born in London, Middlesex, England. And he died at a place called Quincy Township in Franklin County, Pennsylvania. And according to what's in Family Search presently, and by the way, since I am not signed in for this person, I'm not related to this person, so I'm not making any changes. I will note things that might need to be changed, but I personally am not going to make those changes. Otherwise, in Family Search, they show up in my name, and that just causes people to question who I am and why I'm related. So not going to happen. Okay, so he was married to someone who is recorded as Mary Polly Holland, and he has 4 recorded children. The first child was born in Quincy, Franklin, Pennsylvania, and died in Farmington, Davis County, Utah. The second one, Elizabeth Ann Terman, was also born in Quincy Township, and she died in 1896. When we get to this point, if you see, I just looked at 2 birth records on the children, and first one says Quincy, Franklin. There is a Quincy town. It's an unincorporated town. It may have been incorporated after these people were born, but at the time it was unincorporated. What that means is that the town was not formally recognized as a town. It may have been called that. People may have lived there, but they weren't, it wasn't a town organization as such. And Elizabeth Ann Terman says she was born in Quincy Township. This brings up a question about Pennsylvania. And one of the first things that you look at when you're doing research is look at the locations, location, 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 as I say. And so one says Quincy and one says Quincy Township. And so how about we kind of sort out that information first? And the first thing to do, and because of time constraints here today, what I will do is for the ones that I've already researched, I will basically click on that and allow my screen to go to that particular website. So normally I'd be typing in something to do a search. So I did a search for Quincy, Pennsylvania, and here's the Wikipedia description, extremely short. And it says it's an unincorporated community in Quincy Township in southeastern Franklin County in the state of Pennsylvania. And on the Pennsylvania map over on the extreme right-hand side, you can see a little dot at the bottom. If you can't see, I can zoom up a little bit and you'll see it's in Franklin County. So what does this mean? Well, one of the things that you'll find, for example, with Pennsylvania almost immediately is there's counties, there's cities, there's townships, and there's lots of other little organizations in Pennsylvania that perhaps you won't see too much out here in the West. But what is a township? Well, a township is an area of land that was surveyed and designated as a township. And it may or may not have any kind of a governmental organization attached to the township. Within the township, there will be towns, and as those towns that have got incorporated, usually what happens is the town boundaries fill up the township. So there is no extra township property. However, in Pennsylvania, you will often see references to the township because there may be property that is not yet in a municipality, in a town or a village. And so sometimes there are township records. It's just it's kind of sporadic across, as you do research across Pennsylvania, as to whether or not you're going to find any records for the township as such. Okay, so we know Quincy's kind of a little tiny place, and it's so small, in fact, that they don't even have on Wikipedia any reference to the population. But it's a very small place. So Quincy is very small, the township, and if we then go to look at what they have to say about the township, the township's a little bit larger, and it has it had a population in 2010 of about 5,800, and it's now dropped, or 5,500, and it was down from 5,800 in the 2000 census. So it's a place where people are actually leaving. Now you have a map of the township, and you can see where it's located within the county. The red part over on the right-hand side is the township, and the county is then the red kind of triangle down on the map of Pennsylvania. And the important thing here to look at is that it was settled in 1733 and incorporated in 1838. So you look at the dates on the people over here on the family search to the left here, and you'll see that we have someone born in that township apparently in 1820. So it wasn't incorporated until 1838. That really does bring up an issue, because the issue is that technically this township didn't exist. Now, why do we think about this? Why is this an important factor? Well, the answer to that is pretty simple. It's an important factor because where are the records? If this person was actually born in Quincy Township in Franklin, Pennsylvania, they weren't born there in 1820. Because that isn't, or the township didn't exist. So they were born, could have been born in Franklin County, but they probably were not born in Quincy Township. So why would somebody say that they were born in Quincy Township? Well, probably because the record or the reference was made after the township was actually incorporated in 1838, 18 years after this person was supposedly born. So beginning right now, okay, without having done a tremendous amount of research at this point, other than just to look up the places and see what they were and what they were, we can already see why there might be some difficulty in determining who the parents of Greenberry Terman were, because we haven't really focused in on where they lived or what the existence of where they lived was at the time that these events in their lives were supposed to have occurred. Now, another important thing is that these two children apparently migrated to Utah. We can assume that for some reason and somehow that they joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because very few other people for any other reason went to Utah beginning about in the mid 1800s. So that's another avenue of research. We really need to get a lot more information about these people than we presently have, both of these ones. Now, these two that were supposedly born and died in Quincy, Franklin County, Pennsylvania, create another interesting situation. This one was born in 1822 in Quincy, Franklin, Pennsylvania. So we go back to Quincy and see when it was, it had been a post office since 1830, and it was originally built up chiefly by Germans. So are we going to start to suspect that these people were Germans that moved there, or that's at least one hint to what could possibly have happened with this in this particular situation. So that may be a German derivative name. It may be what the name was in German. We don't know that right now. That's something that we would have to investigate. But again, the timing here is really off, because this person was born in 1822 and died in 1829 at the age of 7. So that's not really going to happen much. And then there's a second daughter who supposedly born in the same place in Franklin County, though, in 1824, and she dies in 1880. So that's only, well, that's enough time to get married and have some kids. So maybe we need to do more research on these two, or to see if there are other children. We have a child here born, a marriage that's recorded for 1815, a child born in 1816. 4 years later, another child in 1820, 2 years, 1822, and 2 years, 1824. We do have a break here between William and Eliza as to whether or not there may be a missing child or two. Okay, so let's now look at the wife and open a link in a new tab so we can have our tabs open. And we have her born in London, England also. And then we have a christening date of 1796 in London, England. That's very specific, a very specific record with not only a christening date, but a birth date and a name and a death date of 26 July 1890, and she dies in Franklin, Pennsylvania, and then she's buried in Waynesboro. Well, it'd be nice to have a map of these places. Okay, so doing some research here, I found an old map. This is a map that was made in 1868. So it's a little bit after all these people, but it does show all of these. And but by the way, in 1868, it shows all the landowners on this map. So you have the names are all the people who own the different houses and in this area, and you can actually look at all the areas. So we can see here, and if we look back out on the map, we are basically not going to see Waynesboro. So what we're going to do then is to go to maps, and we'll go to Quincy, Pennsylvania, and there it is, and we can see it. And if we're interested, we can pull out the street view and go to this crossroads area, and we can see what we have. Little tiny town with some big houses. Quite a established looking place. When we look at these houses that are built, the interesting part about it is the way they're built. They're copying in the English style of building a little bit, probably something that's generally common throughout the northeastern part of the United States. But you see the number of windows on this house. This is probably a multiple dwelling. In other words, this was probably a boarding house. And there's some other things that are going on here. There may be another one here. Depending on how early that time period was, there could have been attacks on windows. So sometimes there weren't as many windows. But see, we're out of town already. So it's just like a few clicks and we're out of here. So anyone who is living in Quincy or Quincy Township should be pretty well documented. So we should be able to find these people, because it's a very small town. And one thing that sticks out here when we go back to the picture, the side for Mary Polly Holland, is that Polly is a nickname for Mary Holland. And if we look at the sources for Mary Holland, we do have a source for an England birth and christening, but it's an extracted IGI record. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, it means that this was an international genealogical index record that was extracted during the probably 60s to 1960s to 1970s. And it's a name. They copied the name out. If this person's name was Mary Holland, then they stuck it out here and they said that their parents' names were William and Margaret. But there's nothing here in this particular record that would indicate that Mary Holland in Franklin County is this person. What do we have that shows that Mary Holland was actually this person? Well, we'll look down here. Second copy of the same record, also an extracted record from the IGI. When I say that, what that means is there was no actual research that was done. Someone who was doing the extraction saw the name Mary or Elizabeth Mary, like in this one, for example, with a different father and mother. And someone came along and saw the name Mary Holland and saw the name Elizabeth Mary Holland, and that attached those records, or Family Search attached it actually by a search algorithm, and just attached it to this person. So there's nothing really that tells us that either of these birth and christening records are this particular person at all. And so there's just no reason to believe that they were. And it's probably unlikely that they were. So now we have Mary Holland in an entry for Eliza Ann Turman. This is a Nauvoo community report project. This is actual research. And it says that Mary Holland was Greenberry Turman's wife, and they had a daughter named Eliza Ann Turman. And then she was actually one who joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and lived in Nauvoo and was there from 1839 to 1846. So she was there for quite some period of time. So there's probably a backstory that would tell more information about this person. So I would be looking for a lot more information about Eliza Ann Turman. Someone may have written her life story. There could be a lot more information about her. And then we're looking, by the way, at Mary Polly. And this is interesting. Polly is the nickname, I may have already mentioned, of Mary. So sticking Polly in there doesn't help us. And it's obvious from the records that we've looked at so far that her name was not Mary Polly. And so that needs to be edited out. And if there actually is a record that shows that she was named or called Polly, that goes into the alternative information, the other additional information section. Okay, so here we have an 19 census, Mary Tarnian in the home of William Tarnian in 1870. And we're wondering why that's here, because this is in Quincy, and we have Mary, and we have her with William, and we have the William Tarnian, and we have another William down here who's 4 years old. But this person may or may not be the wife of William. Possible. It looks like she is. And there's another Mary, Melinda Tarnian, and then there's Mary Tarnian down here who's 72. And you would think that she would be the mother of this William Tarnian, because she's living with William Tarnian and his family, and she's old. But let's go back and see what we have for a family. Well, there's William, but on this, the William dies in 1886 in Farmington, Davis County, Utah. And this, let's see where that is. It's the United States Census. And this one is the 1870 census. And it is actually still in Quincy County. This is a very interesting, this starts to open up some very interesting questions about this particular family. If William was living with Mary in Quincy, and William was the first son, then who's the William that moves to Nauvoo and ends up dying in Utah? Okay, so we have some really interesting questions that can't be answered. but without doing a lot of research. So we really need to know who the person in Utah was and whether or not he was really the same person as here in Quincy. Now, there is a possibility that he joined the church and moved west after this census and then died in the west. That could happen. But that would have to be, more research would have to be done. And that's why one of the reasons why we do, when we have this kind of end-of-line situation, we do a lot more research on the children than is normally done, because sorting out the children and why and how they could be moving across the world, is the question. So if this Mary Tarnian, who is in the household of William Tarnian instead of Terman, and if that's spelled Tarnian instead of Terman, that could also be a tremendous difference. Maybe they've misspelled Terman, and maybe they all spelled it Tarnian. So these are the kinds of questions you ask and the kinds of issues that are going to be involved with doing some additional research. Now, there's another issue here that we probably should look at real quick, and that is if we go to Find My Past, which is the English, and you'll recall that George Terman back here was supposed to have been born in, or except Greenberry Terman was supposed to have been born in London, England. Okay, so London, Middlesex, England. Well, let's just look at that. So here we are in Find My Past. Find My Past is the English website, one of the Family Search Partner websites, has millions and millions, if not billions of records, and you can search all the records at once. So we're going to search all the records at once, and we're going to put in Terman. And what's this going to tell me? Immediately, it's going to tell me how many people in all the world records on Find My Past have that surname. And the number here is there's 5,257 records with the name Terman. That is almost makes this a unique name. The number there can be into the millions. Okay, so let me just quickly do you an idea. Let's put in Smith and see if it will calculate how many Smiths there are in the world. 42 million. Okay, and we'll get rid of that because we don't really want to know about all the Smiths in the world. But we have Terman that we've looked for, and we're going to cut that down to England and see how many there are just in England. And there's only 600 people in all of the records through all of the hundreds of years of records on Find My Past that have that surname. This is a really, really small number of people. And if you have this situation, the chances that all of these people are interrelated, that everyone on this list will be related, is very, very high. And I rarely see numbers that low. I have seen numbers as low as 100 or even less, but that's very unusual, very, very unusual. This is just unusual. Now, the question is, how many of those were born in London? So let's look at London records and see how many. So there's only 80 people left. So let's see if any of these people happen to have the name of Greenberry. So we can look down through here, and there's an easier way to do this. How about putting in his name? And it will include all of the possible spellings of that, and there are none. So out of all of the records that are on Find My Past with that spelling of that last name and all of the invariant, now if I go to variants, there's lots of variant names. So with a lot of variant name, well, that's still not very many people with that many. And so, because that's for Greenberry. So now we have quite a few more if we include all the name variations. So here's the problem that occurs. What that suggests is that Terman may be one variant of a more common name, a name that has a possibility. So let's look down real quick and see if, let's run out here a few pages. See, now the problem is that there are so many numbers here because they've accumulated everybody whose name started with T. And so that really doesn't tell us how many. So if we don't include name variants, then it drops back down to the 80 results. And out of those, there are none that appear to be called, because the search, there's nobody in here that is basically called Greenberry. So what about the name Greenberry? Well, let's see how common the name Greenberry is. Let's put in Greenberry name, and it says it's British origin. They're very inspiring and graceful in kind and everything. Okay, fine, they're great. But it says people with the name Greenberry are usually Hindu by religion. How's that for an interesting fact? So what you have here is maybe just popular among those people, but that particular group of people, but it's not a very prominent, it has it's unknown origin, but it can be, it can be a name. And as a matter of fact, it does show up occasionally, but it doesn't really help us either. Okay, so what do we know? Let's stop for just a second and go back to him. What do we know? Well, we know that we have some serious questions about the identity of the children. We know that the wife's name was probably not Polly, or it may have been, and she may have been that, but that is in any event probably a nickname, not her given names. And so the question is, can we find anything more about Greenberry Terman? So let's look at some of the kinds of records that we could, that would tell us that. I'm just going to give some ideas about that. We can do that and understand what kinds of records that we would need if we go to Family Search and do a search in the catalog. Now, why would this catalog search help us? Well, because if we do Pennsylvania, real quick, we will find here under this catalog search a list, a very long list, I might add, of different types of records, catalog entry records for Pennsylvania. Now, these are the records for Pennsylvania on the state level. So we're talking about records that would be kept on the state level. So let's look at vital records and see what happens. And if you go down through this, you'll see that there are marriages from central Pennsylvania, and you have to look down through the long list of all the record sets that are available. And you'll see early Pennsylvania births, and you'll see another one. So there's a lot of records here to search. There's lots of places just at the state level where you would want to search. And with a name that appears to be so uncommon as Greenberry, and another name as a surname that appears to be extremely uncommon, even if you spell it different ways, like T-E-R-M-A-N or T-E-R-M-E-N or whatever, T-E-R-R-M-A-N. Some of those names may not come up at all as being real names. So you can do that by doing Google searches on the names, and that'll give you an idea of whether or not they're some variations that are possible could be are the real name. So now we're looking down through the records for here, but what we want to do is go to Franklin County. So we go here to Franklin County, and here's another set of records. These are not duplicative of the long set of records that we had. but these are records kept on the county level. So are there places within Franklin County? Yes, and we basically, if we look down through the list, we find that there is no Quincy. There's a Quincy. Okay, there's a Quincy. And this is Quincy, and we have cemeteries, and we have names from the Nunnery Cemetery in Quincy. And we view this record, and it's right there. We can look at the record. And now we have a long list of more records that we can go through and look for additional information about that particular area, about Quincy. Okay, so we may find, in other words, as we go through this, we don't necessarily, and this particular record doesn't tell us a time frame, so we need to look at the record and determine whether it had a time frame. And also, we don't know, we'd need to do some research on the Nunnery Cemetery in Quincy, Pennsylvania, to see who was buried there, because that may be a cemetery for the nunnery, which would be Catholic records. And so that brings up another issue when you go back to the individual, is were they religious and did they belong to a church? So what kinds of churches did we have? Well, if we go to maps again real quick, we can go back to Quincy, Pennsylvania. And then we can add it on maps. You can add churches, and it will do churches near Quincy, Pennsylvania. And then you'll see the churches pop up on the map. And if you zoom out a ways, you'll get more churches. So what churches are these? Well, there's kind of a non-denominational one. There's a St. Paul's Lutheran Church. There's a United Methodist Church. There's a Blue Rock Church. There's a Seventh-day Baptist. Oh, well, there's a Seventh-day Baptist Church there. Well, that's interesting. Snow Hill Seventh-day Baptist. My ancestors in Rhode Island were Seventh-day Baptists. So there are still people around with Seventh-day Baptist. Trinity, Emmanuel. What's missing here? What is missing that would be something that you would probably have to assume? Let's go back to Greenberry and look at the sources. Here's the source down here that says he was born in he was birthed in London, England in 1790. So this, by the way, I'm just going to mention the fact that I did a specific search for this particular record with the name in Find My Past and in Ancestry and in Family Search. And this record is supposed to be possession of someone, and there's no copy of it. And I cannot locate anything in all of those records in any of those other records from Ancestry, which has a huge number of English records, Find My Past, which we've already seen has a huge number of English records, and Ancestor and Family Search, which has a huge number of English records, and none of them have a birth record in London for Greenberry Terman. So this, I would just, basically what I would be doing would be to contacting this person and say, could you please send me a copy of the birth record showing who the person's parents were? So if it's a christening record. Now, but the other thing that happens from this is that we can make an assumption. I mean, this is going to be an assumption. It doesn't necessarily could be disproved, but I'm going to assume because this person was supposedly christened or born in London, England, that they, and I'm a little bit, and here it says they were born and has a birth record in 1790. I don't think so. I think they had a christening record in 1790. It does not, birth records are very, not say uncommon, but they are not usual, especially back in 1790 in England. You can find a christening record, but to find a birth record is just a chance that the priest who did the christening record would note that they were born on a certain date. That would be the only way. But then you would have two dates, the birth date and the christening date. So this is kind of a, where did this come from? And is it really this person kind of a thing? And how did we know this? Well, but here's the assumption. The assumption is, okay, if this is an actual birth record and it actually existed, then there was an extremely high possibility that these people were Church of England. And so why were they living in Quincy? Because if we look around here, there's a Lutheran church, would be highly unusual for someone from England to be a Lutheran. A Methodist church, it's possible they were a separatist and a Methodist, but none of these other churches are Church of England. Oh, way down here. Okay, here we go. There's a St. Mary's Episcopal Church. So we'll try that. And we have a direction. So we'd have to do a little bit of searching, because if they were actually from England, they may have been associated with this church. And you could call these people on their phone, and it's phone number right there, and ask them some questions about their church. When was it established? How long has it been there? Would they have records from the 1800s? And so this would be one avenue of research also that would help to put these people into some context. So in other words, what we've got here is a lot of questions, a lot of references, and a lot of things. And there's some other avenues, and the types of records, for example, that we would be looking at if we were going back to the catalog and looking here at the list of records. We see there are church records, but that's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints record, and this one is called the Quincy Reformed Church, 1891 and 1906. So neither one of those helped too much. And we really don't have that much more about Quincy. We would want to do searches on Ancestry and on Find My Past to see if there were additional records specific to that. But if we go back up here to Franklin County, we have a lot of records. And the records that we would first want to look for is a probate record, because he was supposedly died and buried there in Franklin County. So we go back to the date. There's in Pennsylvania, the court that has the probate records is called an orphans court. So you're going to look through orphans court book records for the records. And here's a widow's appraisement records, will books, and all these records, individually having to search each of these records. So for example, estate papers and registers of wills from 1784 to 1822, and he died in 1825. So too bad. Anyway, some of these records will cover that time period. So this one's to 1838. So here's courthouse records, including the probates, wills, and land records. So we can click there, and we see that there's they are digitized, and there's the records, and there's only 350 of them. So it's not going to be a monumental task to go through all those records, because you'll have them. And if you have an approximate death date, they may be in some kind of order chronologically. Or if we look further at the record, we may find that there is an index or someplace here with the record. But otherwise, you're going to be doing the time-honored task that all genealogists have to do. Well, this might be an index. Yep, okay, we have an index. So just for interest, real quick here, let's go down to the end of the alphabet and see what we can find. And right quick, there are no termins or anything that looks like a termin as a probate record. in this particular list. That doesn't mean anything. All that means is you've looked in one list, and you may want to keep a research log in order to make sure you're not recopying and redoing everything 5 times from this. There's a tantrum. That's the process. And so we're going to be looking for probate records. We're going to be looking for vital records. We're going to look for the marriage records. We're going to look through marriage records for the kids. We're going to look through all the different kinds of records that we can possibly think of that might be available, court records, and more than anything, land and property records. Because all of those can fix the people in time and space and be able to get those records and find those records either on Family Search or on Ancestry or on Find My Past. So now, what else can we do? Well, one avenue of pursuit is to start doing researches online, like putting in the places and the names. So what if we just put in his name as a name? Well, we already did that. So let's put in his whole name, T-R-M-A-N, and get a little drink. Thanks. So we have Lisanne Turman. That's the link to Family Search. Here's a William Turman. There's Mary Polly Holland in the Nauvoo Community Project, and that's apparently where that name came from. And then we have Eliza Ann Thornton Turman, and we have a few other things here, Frederick. So we can look through this and see if here's early marriage records. Now we're just getting Greenberries, so that's not, we're through that search. So what else would we want to do? Well, let's look at it, like I said from the beginning, with location, location, location. So what we would want to do here is to look for histories of those particular areas. So I've done that, and I'm going to give you, I'm going to just click real quick and go to one of the ones. This is the historical sketch of Franklin County, Pennsylvania. And it's a book written in 1878, which is shortly after these people were there, or during the time they were probably there. And it's a copy from the Library of Congress. And with one thing, when you're doing this, we're on the Internet Archive. That's archive.org, archive.org, archive.org. And you can put in any name you want and do a search, and it will come up with 0 results, which tells you that that's probably not going to be. So let's see if we hit the jackpot with Greenberry. And by the way, archive.org has indexed every single word in all these books. There are, by the way, and this is a Greenberry Murphy, too bad, second lieutenant. But let's go down, let's go to another book on archive.org. This is Historical Papers of Franklin County and the Cumberland Valley. Now, even though you don't find the name in these books, it would be helpful to go through the information that's there to find out if there was even that possibility. In other words, would this person have been in this place at this time? Now, we're not doubting necessarily that that's the case, because we do have a couple of sources that put them in that place, but it would be helpful to know what the total concept. It says, like, for example, on this page, which is just a random page, yes, while Quincy is the newest township in point of organization, is among the oldest in point of settlement, and an interesting query comes to mind, which has earmarks of a historical riddle, etc. So in other words, there's some really questions here that might be answered. And by the way, the research right here, and you'll see right here in front of us, it says William Turman. And that's what it found immediately. So we look down on our list over here and we see the first child born was William Terman, and he was supposed to have died in Utah. And so we need to read this and get a time frame. And so we can see if we actually have connected this person, or that's going to be another great mystery of how this person actually ended up in Utah to die. Okay, so another thing, and I showed the map earlier, and then interestingly enough, if you do a search for Franklin County, you'll find out that there's a Franklin County Archives. And if I were interested really in finding out all this, I have another phone number here, which is lovely. I would call them up during their hours of operation and ask some questions. And this may give you enough of an incentive that you may want to travel across the country, take a plane out to Pennsylvania, get a car, go down and go to the Franklin County Archives and talk to the people and go through some records. But otherwise, there may be some research resources here, as they've got listed on their local resources, and there's other resources that would tell us a lot of more. There may be a lot more information here in the archives, and this may be information that has not made its way into some of the big websites like Family Search and the Internet Archive. So depending on your dedication, depending on your interest and how persistent you want to be in locating a person like this, in this case, Greenberry Terman, if you really want to find this person, there's a lot more. I don't want to discourage anybody, but I put together all of this in about 2 hours of work, and I have questions that would probably take many hours of reading through records and to answer some of the very obvious questions that exist here. The very first one that let's kind of make some conclusions in the last few minutes here. One of the conclusions is that it's very, very doubtful that this person is the same person who was born in Middlesex, England in 1790. Another conclusion is that even though he's buried there in Tomstown, it would also be interesting to contact the cemetery, if there is actually a cemetery and he's not just buried on somebody's yard, that why, records, there may be additional cemetery records. But when we go down the list here and we see the people, we definitely need to straighten out whether this William Terman is the same one in the records that are already attached. The one that lives in Pennsylvania with his mother named Mary, when it looks to me like he may have been already in Utah. And then also Eliza Ann Terman. And then if these two daughters died at as young ages as they are, there may not be a lot to follow up with that. But generally speaking, these people are end-of-line people for a number of reasons. And one of the most common reasons is that there has been no systematic research done on all of the different things. Here we have a marriage record, for example, that says they got married in Pennsylvania, but there's another one that said they got married about 1815 in Quincy. That is probably a guess because the first child is born in Quincy in 1816. But then we need to see if there actually were marriage records available in 1815 in Quincy, and that would be pretty easy to determine, because let's go back. And so if we go here to Franklin County and we go to Quincy, there are no specific ones that say there's church records, but they're not, that wouldn't help us. So there's no birth records there, marriage records there. So we want to go to Franklin County and quickly to see if there are any marriage records available. Here's marriage license 1885. 1857, 1894, 1893, 1942. Quick look through here says, where did the marriage record come from? So really, that is really a guess. That may not even be accurate at all. Okay, well, that's it. Any questions?
Elder Tanner, I found find a grave on a polytarman who died in 1890 and she's buried at Antietam Church Cemetery in Waynesboro, which is consistent with that burial place. And if you on the map, it's about 4 miles from Quincy. And there's an obituary on it. It says, an aged woman dead. Mrs. Polly Terman died at the residence of Benjamin Friedley Friday, last after an illness of only 1 week. She was one of the oldest persons in Quincy Township, having attained 92 years, 3 months, and 24 days. She was well known in her vanity and will be greatly missed by many persons and many families.
Okay, well, there's another set of areas to, geographic places to look. And also the fact that she's mentioned with other person, who are they? And why was she living with them? You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah. She was the old order of German Baptists.
Well,
Right.
so that rules out her being baptized in London, huh?
Yeah. If that's the same one.
Because if she was an old order of German Baptist, it's unlikely that she was christened in England in about that same time period. So there's lots of, you can begin to see that just a little bit of analysis here is showing out lots and lots of inconsistencies, lots of things that need to be resolved.